Now let's move in to chapter 19. John's Gospel and chapter 19. Now here again, John emphasizes certain things, but it's the other Gospels that can give us insight. What do we read here in chapter 19 and verse 1? Therefore, Pilate, he took Yeshua and flogged. And the word him is not there, but that's the intent. He had Yeshua flogged. We need to understand this. I mentioned a few weeks ago that Yeshua just didn't suffer the crucifixion. I mean, that is horrendous enough. That is a torturesome way to die. Horrible. But Yeshua suffered greatly before he was nailed to the cross. He was already struck in the trial of the Sanhedrin. Now, in John's Gospel, it only mentions that one time. But in the other Gospels, we see Yeshua being beaten by these servants while he was under the authority of the Sanhedrin, and that is, again, a violation of the protocol of the Sanhedrin. Now we're going to find that Yeshua is flogged. It is in Luke's Gospel that we're given the intent that Pontius Pilate had him flogged severely in order that the leadership would say, enough, and back away from having him crucified. That was Pontius Pilate's intent. So he had Yeshua flogged. What is that? Well, that is taking a club and putting leather straps on that club and making it into a whip. And in these leather straps, they would put pieces of glass or bone or metal. And not only would the person be whipped, but when that whip would go across, those leather straps would go across someone's back, those sharp things, whether they were bone or glass or metal, whatever they might be, they would open up the flesh of that individual. And a person who was flogged, oftentimes they would die because of shock. That is, they would be beaten to death and their bodies just could not contain it anymore. So Yeshua was flogged severely. How do we know that? What is the scriptural basis for me to say that? How do we know that he wasn't just flogged lightly? Well, keep reading. Verse 38. After saying this, he went out, back in John chapter 18, he went out to the Jewish people. He says that he's found no guiltiness in him. Now he has, chapter 19, verse 1, he has Yeshua taken and flogged, and the soldiers did other things. The soldiers twisted a crown of thorns and placed it upon his head. That would have been a painful thing, having thorns stuck into your scalp and your forehead and around your head. And they mocked him. They placed a garment of, and the word here is argaman in Hebrew. And this is a royal color. It's a royal garment. So they placed that around him. And they said, "Hail," that is a term of praise, "O King of the Jews." And they also gave to him that open hand punches. Now, what's going on here? Two things. First of all, we see that Yeshua is suffering greatly. He is being tortured. Not only is he flogged almost to death, but he also is having people beat him with their forehands. And the purpose of that was to bring a disorienting fact into a person's mind. It was a way of just beating them and almost giving them a concussion. Secondly, these things of putting a crown, as he's mocking that he's a king, and putting a royal garment on him, all this was to say something, and that was this: that Pontius Pilate, who probably gave the orders for such things, was saying, I do not accept him being a legitimate king. You have no reason to feel threatened by him. So Pontius Pilate is trying to convey to the Jewish leadership, he's not a threat, you shouldn't take him seriously, and I'm having this horrible punishment being displayed to him. Being beaten, being flogged nearly to death, and that should be sufficient. But what happens? Well, keep reading. Look now to verse 4. Therefore, Pilate went out again outside. Now, this is how we know that what he said earlier was not to the Jewish leadership outside, but inside the judgment hall. So, verse 4, therefore again, and that's emphasized, Pontius Pilate went outside. The word outside literally in the Greek language appears twice to emphasize where he is. And he says to them, the them is the Jewish leadership, behold, I bring him out to you, in order that you might know that in him no guilt I have found. So this is the second time that he said this. Now, what's he trying to convey? Very simply. He's saying to them, I have found no guilt, but because of you, notice what I've done to him. I have beaten him by having him flogged. We have mocked him. We have beaten him with our hands. And I find no threat whatsoever that he's a legitimate king for you to be concerned about. His hope is that that would be enough and it would end everything at that time. But something else takes place. Verse 5. Therefore Yeshua went outside, and he was dressed in that he had that crown of thorns and that purple garment upon him. And he says, that is Pilate, says to them, and this is such an important statement, he says, behold the man. Now, what is the significance of Pilate saying, behold the man? Well, let me tell you what the best scholars teach, and that is this. When someone is flogged in such a brutal manner, when someone has this mocking, where they put a crown of thorns upon their head, I mean, that would have opened up all types of wounds around the forehead and the scalp of that individual. It would have been painful. And secondly, we need to remember that they took their fists, their open hands, and gave these slaps across their head of Yeshua. He would have been suffering great beatings as well. And all of this served to do one thing. When someone is in pain, when someone's not feeling well, you can almost see it, right? You say, you don't look so well today. Well, Yeshua would have been so bloodied by what they had done, both his back and now his head. It would have been streaming down his face blood. He would have been bruised severely. Now, whether